Vaishnavancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhaveva Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dandavad Pranam devotees, Vaishnavis, Maharajas. First offering my Dandavad Pranam millions of times at the lotus feet of my Guru Parapadma Nityalila Purushom Shnupada Paramahamsa Paribhaja Pachajo Ashto Tarasapasisima Chula Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. As well unto the lotus feet of both of my Param Gurudevs, Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj, our Srila Prabhupada, and unto Acharya Keshari, Srila Bhakti Pragan Kesha Goswami Maharaj, onto our entire Guru Parampara. So, this is installment 5 of the narration of the pioneering of the preaching in Africa. And I wanted to start off this section with a photo. I always have to be a little careful because I know there's a reflection here and you can't always see these photos very well. I'm going to make an attempt at any rate. But yeah, you can see two personalities here. And the personality that I have my finger closest to here is Swami Ganananda. And this was one of his first disciples. When His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami and Bhakta Martin first went to Ghana, they stayed with Swami Ganananda at his place that he has there. It's called the Hindu Temple of Ghana. There are two temples there. One is in Osu, and that's a Hindu temple built by the Indian community that's there. And then there's the temple of Swami Ganananda, which just happened to be down the hill from where we established, as I mentioned in the last installment, we found a beautiful building which became our main temple in Ghana up until the new temple was built, which was, I guess, not so long ago. It's been at least maybe, 5, 7, 8, 9 years. I can't remember exactly. But prior to that, that was the main temple in Ghana, which was a temple in Odoko, official town. And I described the building was extremely beautiful, and we had set up shop there and began our preaching. But down the hill from us and across the road was the temple of Swami Ganananda. It was very beautiful. He had built it, with the help of, patrons and so forth many years before we had gotten established there. And as I mentioned, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami and Bhakta Martin on their first visit to Ghana, well, not obviously Bhakta Martin because he's from Ghana, but when he took Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj there, they stayed there. And Swami Ganananda was very cordial in hosting them and so forth. So I think Pujapad Shanta Maharaj, who is Bhakta Martin, I'm sure whenever he's able to chime in, he'll give some stories of that particular visit and the things that went on. But it was very interesting because there would be some interplay between our temple once we were established and the temple that he had established, which was, it was like a little bit of a roller coaster in the sense that, obviously that temple, the thrust, though they have deities there, the thrust of their teachings is impersonal. And of course, nature of bhakti is just the opposite. It's the teachings of personalism and so forth. So we would have very interesting debates and dialogues. And I remember Swami Ganananda also used to travel. And the second person that I had pointed out in the photograph, when I show the photograph, I'll bring it back up again here. The gentleman here, this is him, I guess, more recently. He was a much younger gentleman there, but he was like the main brahmachari, or the main student celibate student person who was working under Swami Gananand back at that time. And I remember over the course of time, I think I've really gotten ahead of myself in the story, but over the course of time, since I had their pictures up, I guess I'll tell it, he became a devotee. So he ended up coming up and staying with us in the ashram there and everything. I don't know what happened later on down the line. I know he had a very deep connection and attachment to Swami Ganananda because his spiritual life, I think, when he was a young man, began under the auspices of the teachings of Swami Ganananda. I can't remember exactly which line that Swami Ganananda came from. It was, I think, Shivananda or Muktananda. I think it was Shivananda, actually. And so it was just a very interesting thing because, you know, we always remained cordial in our dealings with each other, but now was obviously some level of competitive energy that was there, not in a negative sense at all, but some level of competitive energy because we had this huge temple. And of course, Krishna consciousness is very proactive in terms of preaching and going out, and we do Harinam and all these sort of things. So it was pretty interesting. So as I mentioned in the last installment, we had found a new building. Our first building was in Alajo, and it was a small 3-bedroom house, and we only had a couple of devotees. Bhakti and Elizabeth came first, of course myself, my former wife, Bhakta Martin, and then gradually one devotee who later became Gyanadas and Ekachakra and Jiva Goswami. Those three came in. So we had a nice little crew at that time. And when we found the new building, we all moved into there. And it was, you know, pretty amazing because it's hard for me. I really wish I had a picture because to describe the way this building looked, it was like on the top of a hill. The place where we were, Odoko, or official town, this is one section, it's sort of, you had the market, one market I remember over here, and then I remember Swami Gananand's temple was like, you know, in a section right over here. You cross a main road, and then you go up through these kind of dirt roads. You go up like a hill, a continuous elevation, and then when you got to the top area and you turned, there was another small market. There were other houses around. Then there was this huge, you know, palatial building stuck right in the middle, and that was our temple. So, of course, after we got that building, we continued with our activities of preaching. So we were going out regularly on Harinam and preaching. One of the people that Bhakta Martin introduced me to early on in the preaching, and who was very instrumental in helping us to get established and to even deal with some of the administrative hurdles that had to be dealt with in terms of, you know, legalizing status and all that sort of stuff, was a gentleman named Guy Fitz. Guy Fitz was, you know, quite a character. He was really jovial, a little large, really super intelligent guy, and a great artist. So he had a facility where he had his artwork and his store, and we would quite often go there and have conversations with him and preach to him and so forth. So he was kind of fully on board. He didn't really join per se and you know, get initiated and all of that, but he was an instrumental part of Krishna consciousness, especially its establishment in Ghana, especially there in Accra. So he also, I think, used to hold books for us and everything else. So when we go into town for preaching, we could go by Guy Fitz and pick up books and things like that. So, as I said, as we went out and we began preaching more and more, obviously more devotees started to come. I think in that next wave of devotees who started to come, we had one Mataji, who later became Theravali, and one young girl named Gifty. I remember her. She never did become initiated. But from Nigeria also, one devotee who was from Ghana originally named Gopal, he came. And then also one Mataji, her name was Jaimini, became her initiated name. And she was a kind of unique personality. she was from a royal family in Nigeria. So she was essentially a princess. And I think even her secular name had princess in it. Not like in America, we just name somebody princess, but actually a part of an official title of her name, she was a princess. So she was, an interesting, very interesting person. There'll be some more stories a little bit about her as we get down the line here. But another devotee who came during that time, those two ended up together, is Ahimsa. And he was a very quiet, humble, mild-mannered devotee who was very studious and was always asking questions and was always trying to learn. Later on, another devotee who became Ramanuja, he also came. I'm just trying to pile up the devotees as I can think of them. One interesting couple of devotees who came, and I'll tell the story about how they came because I think it's pretty interesting. We had often also, while we were preaching, we would go to different other organizations. As I mentioned in the Nigeria section, the Rosicrucian Order, other different kinds of esoteric groups were very popular both in Nigeria and in Ghana. And on any given day, you could pick out a group and go to one of their meetings. There was no kind of restriction. It wasn't members only sort of thing, at least for the open sections of their meeting. So we would often, as part of our preaching, we had devotees out on book distribution. Then myself, Dr. Martin, a lot of times, maybe one or two other devotees, we would go to these different esoteric groups and sit in on their meetings. And then, not in a confrontational way, but in a humble way, we would ask questions at the end in such a way as to create a dialogue, and it gives us a chance to preach. So I don't want anybody to frown on that because we weren't going in and, sort of overwhelming people. Well, this is the real philosophy and et cetera, et cetera. We weren't doing that. We just were genuinely engaging in dialogue, which, a lot of these places, they really appreciated it, and it didn't sway the needle on their faith necessarily unless the person was, sort of not entrenched in that group. And this is, I'll come to the story here. So one such group was called Ekankar. And Ekankar is also here in America, and it's pretty popular. So there, they had a pretty huge crowd. They had a very nice facilities, and I think one of their main speakers who had come from abroad was giving a program. So they had quite a packed house, and we went, we attended, we saw the flyers and everything for it, so we went and we attended it. And they began speaking, and in the course of their speaking, they started to talk about the different levels of achievement. And somehow or another, they mentioned when you reach one of the highest levels, one of the things that you experience is a divine sound of a flute. So, of course, devotees, when we heard that, it was like, the great tingling sensation of the mind. Okay, here's our opening, right? So took note of the opening, allowed the person to finish their lecture, and then when it came time, when the person asked, would anybody like to say anything or ask a question? Of course, we asked the question, well, you mentioned that when you reach the higher realms, you'll be able to hear the sound of a divine flute. Where is that sound coming from? Is it known whether or not someone is emanating that sound? Is it a person? So we're trying to angle towards the fact that the origin of the sound of the flute is coming from the divine personality of Sri Krishna, who plays the flute. So the person either did not know, or maybe that is the height of what is given in the teachings, and they just mentioned, they couched it as sort of, no, it's just like a divine sound that you hear. Like you experience light and you experience divine sound, and that this sound of the flute is one of those divine sounds. It's not necessarily connected to or attributed to someone. So, but two people there, well, a lot of people there actually took note of what we were saying in the dialogue we had, and of course we're dressed in such a way it attracts attention. We have a dhoti, tilak, etc., etc. So when we came outside after the program was over, we're standing around, we had a couple of books, because we always took advantage to do book distribution as well. So, a small crowd gathered around. In that crowd, there were two people who, I'll just go ahead and spill the beans, who later became two devotees, and one devotee very prominently, very wonderful devotee named Srivats, who is now, I believe he's still, if he has not, moved in a different position, he was the regional secretary for West Africa. That was something I did way back in the day, but he was regional secretary now for West Africa in the ISKCON Society. But himself and another devotee named Shukadev, they both were in that crowd. So they had pretty penetrating questions like, well, you're talking about somebody playing the flute. Who's this somebody who's playing the flute, et cetera, et cetera. So that gave us our inroad to start, just straight out preaching and speaking about Krishna consciousness and so forth and so on. And now that we had facility in this huge palatial building, we were super proud to invite people to a Sunday program. So we gave them, they purchased actually some books, and we invited them to come to the Sunday program at the temple. Our temple room was nice at that time. We had not really completed everything. Later on, we would go and we actually had hand carved. I mean, literally, we went and I saw the wood and talked to the carpenter and had him, by a design we had, actually create Vyasa-san. So for Srila Prabhupada, and then I think we had a second one made. And I'll tell the story about who ended up becoming initiating guru there and all of that. But we had these two Vyasa-sans made, and they were amazing. They were hand carved, and it was just really, really wonderful. But we had pretty sparse decorations in the temple room otherwise. We had pictures there. There was one small picture of Nrsingadev that we kept right in the back of the temple room at the top, like on a ledge. And then we had the small altar there in the front. Not small, it was sizable. And we had all the pictures because we did not have actual deities at that time. So we invited devotees, and of course, every morning we had our Srimad Bhagavatam, and on Sundays we started having regularly our Sunday program there. So Srivats and Shukadev Goswami, they started coming pretty regularly and coming to the Sunday program, asking questions and coming to classes, and gradually, by and by, I think both of them were pretty established materially. I can't remember exactly what they did, but they were in school. Could have been that they were also in university. But anyway, they gradually joined. So now we had Shukadev and Srivats as part of our temple crew, along with, the many other devotees who were there. And so our preaching was enhanced because both of them were super intelligent devotees and, super fired up devotees. So, again, we had our thrust of preaching going, and the Sunday program was a really, really big thing because the location of where we were, you could get a lot of walk-by traffic. Even though we were up on the hill, there was the market, as I mentioned, right across from us. And a lot of people were just, in the neighborhood walking by, looking at all the activity, they were coming out of curiosity. So we also always had a lot of walking traffic and people coming in and checking it out. We always had a lot of people who hung around who were not necessarily, devotees per se, but they were like congregation pretty much. They just loved the temple, they loved the atmosphere, they loved the kirtan especially. I think I'll go into that next, our kirtan pastimes. But so we had quite a few people coming on a regular basis now. One of the ways, obviously, we enhanced everything was through Narga Sankirtan. So I can't find any other way to describe, I'll try to describe the evolution of Narga Sankirtan in Accra at that time. So we would do Sankirtan whenever we went out on book distribution. That was always, one of the things we did. But when we would do Narga Sankirtan from the temple, we would normally do it after the Sundararti, and this was a regular thing. So there would be Sundararti in the evening, and then from there, we would go out on Narga Sankirtan. Now, obviously after Sundararti, it's starting to get dark, right? We had daytime kirtans like on the weekends and stuff, but on the weekends especially in the beginning, and then it started to take place on a regular basis nightly, we would leave the temple And if it was dark, we would start, it would be like maybe dusk, so you could still see a little bit and everything. And some of the devotees would have like a couple of, torches, like lights, And we would start out Naga Sankirtan in front of the temple. Everybody would gather. We would open the gate, because there was a front gate there. We'd open that gate, and then we would go ahead and go out onto the street. And, in the first couple of times we did this, everybody would just be happy because people used to seeing us do kirtan and everything. And then we would start on Naga Sankirtan down the road, going down to the main road that I described earlier, and circle around, go around the main road, and come back up another side road. I think we covered maybe 2.5 miles, something like that. I don't think it was extremely long, but it was a nice path, and come back up the other side. Now, in the beginning, all of the little kids, it was the Pied Piper for them, because as soon as we would start, they would join us, and they would do the whole trek, dancing and chanting the entire time. After a while, we started to pick up some adults. Some adults would whatever they were doing, they would, kind of join in, and they would go around, they would come back to whatever they were doing. As this thing evolved, it became incredible. We would start in the courtyard, as I mentioned, of the temple, light our torches, the market across from us, the smaller market across from us, and I used to call her the bow-float lady. Bow-float is like a, lack of a better word, it's like a beignet in New Orleans, or like a donut or something. It's just a sweet, thing fried and so forth, almost like a donut or something. Well, anyway, she was right in front of our temple, pretty much right across the street. And she would shut down, and all the other little market people would shut down. They would get their torches, and now the entire community of Odoko, that official town area right there, would shut down, get torches, and join the Harinam. So it reminded me very much of the march to the Chand Kazi's house, where everybody had torches and the madungas and so forth. So as we went down the hill, people seeing that crowd, and they would join in. So now you almost had, I'm guesstimating numbers, but it would be sizable. I mean, you're talking about a huge crowd. And we would go down, and we would keep picking up people as we went down. And we would go all the way down, we would get to the main road, and by the time we got to the main road, of course, it was a huge crowd with all these torches, madungas going, cartels going, really, powerful and loud chanting. We'd come around and start coming up the other side, and the markets on the other side would start to shut down and join in. And we would come all the way back around and come back up finally to the temple. Now, here's the glubjamin on top of the halava with the bed of sweet rice. We would get back to the gates of the temple. We would come into the courtyard of the temple, and normally I would go up the stairs and stand on the sort of entranceway into the building, because there was a kind of an echo there. So all the devotees, with the madungas, everything would come up there, and now the volume of the kirtan just exponentially would get louder, and it was like an incredible nuance, because you'd come out of the main sort of courtyard in front of the temple, come up onto the thing where you had that echo, and it would just change the dynamic, and everybody was in our courtyard or outside, still dancing and singing and so forth. We would stop everything, and the final thing we would do was sing the Narasimha prayers, right? So people somehow or another loved that, right? So we would do the Narasimha prayers at the end, and then finally do the, Jai Ki Jai. We would do, not a whole Jayadwani, but we would do like, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Jai, she's, Nitai Gauranga Ki Jai, Jai Shri Narasimha Bhagavan Ki Jai. And people were just like yelling. It was, I really wish there were films from back at that time, because it was incredible. It looked like something you would see in Shridhar Mayapur. That sort of energy of a whole village and Naga Sankirtan. So then we would all, right there, we would, finally, after the Shinga prayers, everybody would pay their obeisances and everything. And even some of the secular people from the crowd, they would also bow down. I guess they were just imitating what they saw, so forth and so on. And then people would go back, because this would end about, we would be back at the temple about 8:30 or something like that. We'd start out, 7:30, 7:30, something like that. We'd be back by almost no later than 9. We'd shut everything down. So the market, right across from us, she would open back up for a little while and everything, because they would close down around 10 o'clock or something, because people were still moving around. And then devotees would go in and get, ready for the next day. And this was a daily routine. Our Sankirtan preaching, our outreach preaching. And now that we had a number of devotees, I would focus a lot on going to different kinds of outreach programs and meeting new people, or going to universities, or doing different things. Now that we had so many devotees who I could send out parties on book distribution. Gradually, as our numbers began to build, we took the model. Brother Leela Mataji also, had quite a bit on her hands now, because also we had a number of lady devotees who had started to come, and she both had to do all the teaching, managing, keeping all the right etiquette with the ladies, because we all lived in one building. So she was managing all those things, and also additionally managing just other things in the temple, and so forth and so on. So, we were quite busy. She stayed downstairs. This is where the ladies' ashram was, and the men were upstairs. I had like a room on the front, and then there were like some other rooms up there, and then we had, different devotees in different rooms. And as we grew, obviously the rooms, got more crowded. And I remember, just one incident just to mention. I remember thinking to myself, I shouldn't have my own room, because now as devotees were more, and you'd have like 5-6 devotees sleeping in another room. I just felt there's something that's not right about it. But the devotees, they were always super sweet, super humble. So they always were, no, Prabhuji, or Prabhu or Kendra. That's what I don't know why Prabhu would always come first, then your name, not a Kendra Prabhu, but Prabhu or Kendra. No, you could stay in this room. So I remember one night Krishna made an arrangement for me, since, I couldn't get it through the thickness of my head that, I don't care what they're saying, just go and share a room and keep all the rooms available for multiple people. So I remember being in my room one night, and I just kept like hearing something scurrying around, and, I didn't pay much attention because it never happened before. Now, one of the things maybe that initiated this was, we always kept the temple super clean. But we used to mostly take prasadam downstairs, out either on the front of the porch, or we had another room there where we took prasadam, etc. But after a while, we started to bring, because we had, as I mentioned, this huge veranda sort of upstairs. You walk out, and the top veranda area was as large as the downstairs. So it was like a huge thing. So gradually, we started allowing devotees to take prasadam upstairs. And they could sit out on that huge veranda there. It was very nice, and we could all take prasad there and, talk Harikatha, etc., etc. So anyway, but of course, that eventually leads to a little drop of food here, a little drop of food there, and we got a couple of mice. So I remember sleeping one night, and, everything was pretty clean, but I guess, a mouse came under the door. And, I kept hearing the scurrying, but, I'm like, I hadn't seen anything or heard anything like that before. And it was nothing like the rat situation that we had in Nigeria at the time. But, lo and behold, sure enough, the mouse ended up running across my sleeping arrangement there and everything else. So I decided, because I'm not going to deal with this all night, I decided, well, look, I'm going to show my great humility, falsely, and go join all of the other devotees sleeping in the other room. So the hidden intention of this, of course, was we'll give this mouse many more people to choose from, in terms of attacking them during their sleep. Of course, mice, they weren't biting or anything, but anyway, I remember going into the room in the middle of the night, and all the devotees were a little surprised. So I just put my sleeping bag down and just laid down without saying anything. So, anyway, that was just another funny story. But one of the other preaching adventures we had was I was constantly trying to meet, as I mentioned, different people, whether it was celebrities or educators or whatever it was, just to, continue the elevation of our preaching in different ways. So there was a very, very famous, and of course, if they were musicians, I always tried to meet them because I had a musical background, and that was a natural introduction. So I think there was a huge event sponsored by the government. And there was a gentleman, his name was Kofi Ganaba. And whenever there was a national event, they would call this gentleman to come. And he set up a whole set of the Akan drum. Akan there's different tribes in like everywhere in Africa, different tribes in Ghana. The Akan, Ga, right, Ewe. So the Akan tradition is pretty opulent, and all are, but the Akan tradition, if you see drumming from Ghana, a lot of times you'll see Akan drumming. These are the huge front-thumb and so forth. They play with huge sticks and everything. So he was a master of that tradition, and normally where there are 5 or 6 people playing them, he would play all the drums by himself. And the government so revered him as like a national treasure. They would have him come and play for major events like the opening of soccer events or any other national events. Or if they had a visitor from another country, they would allow him to come and sit in the square and play. So anyway, he lived not so far from the temple. It was a little bit of a ways. We took the van once. I went with Dr. Martin and maybe another couple of devotees. We wanted to give him some books. And we understood that he practiced Buddhism. So that was another interesting thing. So we took the van and we went to visit him. So we were driving and driving and driving, right? So we get out to his residence, and he's got his walled compound and everything. And by the time we get out there, it's getting a little bit towards evening. And I'm kind of concerned about, we need to get back as well because of the RT, kirtan, all these sort of things, but it's dark kind of out where he is at this point. So we're also like, do we knock? Do we just walk in? Do we what? Right? So, I think Dr. Martin or someone else ended up, opening up and going in and knocking, and he comes, and greets us and everything and brings us in, but no lights are on. So I'm like thinking, okay, maybe we disturbed him from sleep or whatever the case is. But he lived in what he considered to be a natural sequence of the day. In other words, when it got dark, it was dark. I mean, it was time, essentially to go to bed. So he only had like these candles, which he illuminated things with, but he didn't really have lights and all these things going on, right? Maybe he had lights, but just didn't use them or whatever. But he lived under that natural thing. I remember him telling me that. And I began talking to him. He told me about his musical life, that, he was a very famous drummer and actually got a chance to play with Miles Davis here in America. His name was Guy Warren. He went to university here, became a pretty famous jazz musician in America, and then he moved back to Ghana and just became absorbed in Buddhism and spiritual life, and, that was his thing. So we had a very nice conversation. We gave him some books, of course, and he was very friendly, very conducive, but a very eccentric kind of person, and a kind of no-nonsense kind of person. So anyways, that was another good connection because his fame in Ghana was very high, and that he now had some connection with devotees and us with him. It made our preaching very nice. Another thing that I didn't mention a little earlier about Ghana, and this happened actually when we were in Alajo, so I'm reversing the sequence here, and forgive me for not being super sequential in these narrations, but I'm trying to describe them from memory, and you're talking about years and years ago. But one of the things that was also outstanding was that we would see I mentioned there are different tribes in Ghana. One tribe is called the Ga. So there's a very famous drumming tradition in the Ga community where it's like a framed drum that you sit on and you play with your feet, and you change the tonality of the drum you play with your hands, but you change the tonality of the drum by using the heel of your foot. And by raising your foot up and down the membrane of the drum, you change the tone of the drum. So there was this little group of kids who were expert at playing this drum, and singing. So they would sing these God songs and play. So when we would come by in the early days, just a few of us, and we would chant Hare Krishna with the mridanga, they would join in. So now we had those group of God kids with the special frame drum and the mridanga, and we would all be chanting Hare Krishna. So that was just another thing I forgot to mention back during our Lajo part. That was really wonderful because these kids, they all naturally sing like in a kind of harmony. It was just really, really, really beautiful. So back at the main temple now, the big temple in Odoko, one of our main things that we would do every morning, because devotees were always up pretty early chanting their rounds. Like a lot of devotees would want to get their rounds done before Mangal Arati. Some definitely would want to get their rounds done before class. So, and I was in that grouping. I always like to chant very early. So, and especially also it was very beautiful. My sort of timeline would be to get up at around 3 or so, and I would go ahead and, shower everything. And the other reason I would get up really early is because, we had multiple people using the shower. And I would just want to go ahead and get showered and get everything. And I would go out and I'd go on the veranda. If it was a little cool, I'd wrap up in a chadar and everything. And I would chant my rounds on the veranda. And I could tell what time it was by a number of things. One is I could tell when the first hour would kind of pass, because then I would start to see little lights come on in the different houses. Like the little kerosene lamps start to come on a little bit. This would be around 4 o'clock, 4:15, right? Then at a little after 5, maybe 5:30, I can't exactly remember, I would hear the adhan, which is the call to prayer for Muslims. There was a mosque not so far from us also, and I would hear the adhan, which is the call to prayer. And that let me know it was about that time. And then around that same time, I would start to see the market and the different people around their houses come out and sweep, just like in India. They would come out and they would have these smaller straw brooms, and they would bend over and they start sweeping and cleaning and so forth. So that's how I would kind of tell tell what time it was and everything like that. And after completing rounds and everything, of course we had Mangal Arati at 5 actually. That's what happened. I chant from 3 till about 5, and then Mangal Arati, and right near the end of our Mangal Arati, which in about 30, 35 minutes, I would hear the adhan, the call to prayer, right? And I would go back up on the roof. I'd usually chant Anik, my Gayatri and everything, and just sit there and chant, a little more. I was chanting, more rounds, than 16 rounds then. After that, of course, we would have our morning Srimad Bhagavatam class, and then we would have breakfast, and breakfast was always really nice because, and one of the things in Africa was that the plentifulness of fresh fruits like papayas, oranges, everything. It was like so many things available that you could eat healthy, and it was really wonderful. So we'd have a really, really nice breakfast. We'd make hot cereal, and we'd have our fruit and everything else. And then I might as well go ahead and plug this in, because this will become a famous part of all of the eating experiences we had in Ghana. Somehow or another, I believe it was either one expatriate male who was married to a Ghanaian woman, or they were both expatriates, I can't remember, expats, and they were living in Ghana. But anyway, they had a home, and they used to make fresh whole wheat bread. And, somehow or another, I don't know who turned us on to that place. I can't really remember now. But we would always go and we would buy loaves and loaves of this bread for the temple. And I remember that you used to have to be on a line because other people were obviously buying the bread. So you get on a line, and the line wound up a staircase. You get up the staircase and you get all your bread and everything and come back down. So it was wonderful. The other thing was a huge factory that sold fresh yogurt. And we would go to the factory and load up with all this fresh yogurt. So part of our breakfast a lot of times also would be this fresh brown bread. We called it brown bread. And yogurt. And then, whatever we were having. Right? And then in terms of, meals in the evening, we always had, there were so many dishes that I liked in Ghana. One was called contumbre, which is the leaves of the yam plant, Those greens, we were using palm oil, or we have yams themselves. And then devotees also just knew how to cook so many things. So we would always have different dishes every night. And another fantastic thing was that, of course, most temples, throughout the world all use curd, right? And curd, of course, all devotees who are listening to this, they know what that is. But if you're not, it's when milk is curdled and then pressed, and it becomes like, it's called curd, and it's little chunks of the milk, which have been, as I said, curdled and then pressed and what have you. So that's used in a lot of dishes in India, and devotees obviously in ISKCON used to use it. So that was something I always thought, well, that's not going to be such a major thing, because in Nigeria I did not experience it as much. Sometimes we go to life members' houses or something, but we didn't do. Later on, we began to do. I think we would make curd on the temple, but in Ghana there is a tribe called Fulanis. And the Fulanis are essentially a cow herding community. Or at least there's an aspect of the Fulani tribe that's a cow herding community. And we would go to either their farm area or at the market, and we would buy curd called wagasi. Wagasi or wagas. Now, it was curd, right? They would get the milk from cows, everything, and they would do the same process, except they used some kind of special leaf. Instead of using lemon or any other curdling agent, they used a leaf that had some kind of bitter taste in it or something if you just ate the leaf itself. But it left a taste in the curd that was unbelievable. Nothing I've ever experienced to this day. So we would go and buy, large quantity of this wagas, and we would keep it at the temple. And Jaimini and Brajalila, just all the Machis, they would just cook, fantastic things. So our evening meals also were pretty good, and Sunday feast was incredible. Just incredible. I already mentioned Kili Willy, the plantain that's mixed with ginger and chilies, and then regular plantain, yams. And then there was another special thing that they would do with yams, which was to make almost like French fries, right? Just really thick cut French fries with a chili paste that you could dip them in. So it was like, there were just so many things. So all of the local food combined with the fact that devotees now who had experience, like Jaimini, Bhakta Martin, Brother Leela obviously was there, and they were making samosas and everything else. So our Sunday feast was also, and then we had the yogurt and everything else. So our Sunday feast was really amazing. And we got grains, we made halva. So Sunday feast was really, really amazing as well. So as we started to develop our program and everything was very set, usually after the morning program, we would get everybody ready and saddled up to go out and do Sankirtan, and then I would have a plan of what kind of preaching I was going to do for that day. If Bhakta Martin was going to lead the Sankirtan parties out and so forth, I would make a plan for who I was going to visit, where I was going to go, and most of those times Bhakta Martin would come with me because he was just influential in the area. A lot of times also, Lakshmi Pati was there, that devotee I told you about who traveled with us to Ghana. And he was, being like the fixer then, right? So he would also, introduce us to people and so forth and so on. So I think we still have a little time. So I'm going to tell another, one of the Southerner stories. So every morning, as I mentioned, devotees would get up really, really early to chant. Then it came a time when we used to want to collect flowers. And there's a particular flower that was in Nigeria and also in Ghana. They used to call them Queen of the Nights. I don't know what the botanical name is, but they're very beautiful. And I'm sure if most people see them, they'll recognize them. It's really beautiful and super fragrant. If you're standing at a distance and you pass an area that has them, the aroma will come to you. So I remember that we used to go out and we used to also pick a number of those to make garlands and to offer to Thakurji during the program. So gradually, after we had enough devotees, we would also start doing a early morning walk. So I'm going to tell one of the funniest stories of our sojourn there in Ghana. Now, we were in Ghana and nobody had yet gone to India. Nor did we have a mechanism of where people were bringing back things from India for us. So everything that we did, as far as devotional clothing, tilak, everything had to be sourced locally. So for instance, we would go down and we would buy, cloth, which was easy to get, right? And we'd buy the cloth, and, those who were brahmachari, they would just dye it. And other than that, we would make dhotis, everything out of the cloth we bought from the market. For tilak, there was a clay that was there in Ghana, and it was really just like Gopi Chandan in the sense that it was very, you wet it a little bit and you could get the same effect. So it was like perfect for using for tilak. And what I would do is I would, Ganga Jamuna Chavego, Lovely Saraswati, Namindu Sindhu coverage, Aleshwin, and he didn't, right? I would, chant mantras on it and everything else. And we were using that for tilak. So the only thing about it was that once it was on, it had more of a whitish color to it. And also, it was really bright. Right? So we got in the habit now of going out to collect flowers in the morning. And while we were out collecting flowers, we would japa walk. Now, we didn't steal flowers. A lot of the neighbors happily, because these trees were pretty abundant, they would happily, allow the devotees to pick some flowers and everything. So anyway, we would go out every morning, and start japa walking. Now, we would always do this. It would still be dark. But as I mentioned, many people would be up and getting ready to go to work. So there was one morning where we were all doing japa walking, and we had a pretty large contingent of devotees. And so everybody's walking and chanting. And we come to one area where there's like a railroad track. So we're going to follow the railroad tracks. So we're walking down this area, and a lot of devotees, they used to wear their upper cloth, and if it was warm, they would not wear a shirt, because obviously walking and everything, you start sweating. So they would not have on shirts. So you would see their tilak markings on the forehead and on their bodies, and they had this very bright white cloth tied in the sannyas vesh. I didn't discourage devotees so much from doing it, because they would tie their dhotis tree cuts, which means like a regular dhoti tied, tucked in 3 places. So I didn't make such a big deal about them wearing their upper cloth, like tied like a sannyasi and so forth. So anyway, a lot of devotees had like that, and as I mentioned, you could see their tilak markings on the forehead, on their bodies, right? And it was dark outside. We're all, African American or African devotees, so it's dark and we're dark, right? And so we're walking, and the overall sound is people are chanting japa. So you just imagine 10, 15 devotees walking, and you can hear Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, right? And so you got 15 people doing that, so it just sounds like a little bit of a hum. You can't really tell what's going on. So as we're walking down the railroad track area, there's a gentleman who comes out of his house, and he's, so many yards away, 20 yards, 25 yards away. And, myself, Bhakta Martin, we're walking in the front, chanting, and the devotees are, right in a group, right behind us here. And so I see the gentleman come out, and I could notice he has a briefcase in his hand. We're walking for some time, so our vision is adjusted. I could see he has a briefcase in his hand. He's dressed, apparently like for office work of some sort. He starts walking towards us. But as he starts walking towards us, he slows down, and I could see him begin to look like he's trying to figure out what exactly is, what is that? What's going on? So as we are getting closer and closer, the distance is closing, right? Then he can, I guess, audibly hear now the devotees chanting. So from his angle of vision, he sees, because it's dark for him, he's just coming out of his home, all he can really see is the luminous nature of these tilak markings, right? And he hears the sound. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. So I can see that he's looking, and he actually walks, and then he comes to a full stop. So then Shanta Maharaj, Bhakta Martin at that time, he looks at the gentleman, he says, Hare Krishna, and he starts going towards him, I guess to greet him, talk to him, whatever. This guy sees him coming, and he turns around, and he runs so fast. And of course, when I saw that, and I saw his reaction, and in my mind it came the picture that for him, he couldn't obviously tell what was going on. So from all he knew was that, you know, some people had risen from the dead, and they were all coming towards him in all of this white, you know, garb with these white luminous marks all over their bodies. And all you can hear is really, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So he took off running. And, you know, the thing that made it even worse, or more hilarious, was that Shanta Maharaj was saying, Hare Krishna, like calling him, wait. And the guy just took off running. So, of course, you know, I had a laughing fit, and my laughing fit is contagious. Devotees also had a laughing fit, and so forth. So, you know, that was a really, really funny story. And, you know, if you could visualize it and just imagine what that was like. So anyways, every morning we would go on morning walks like that. And many times we would have very nice preaching conversations. We would stop somewhere at someone's house, and they would ask, what is this? What is that? And we, you know, give a whole thing. And then that person would later start coming up to visit the temple, you know, on top of the hill and everything. So really, really wonderful, just transcendental pastimes. Ghana was, you know, without a doubt, probably, I don't want to show any favoritism. I loved all the preaching that went on in Africa, but Ghana felt very much like home. There's several pastimes that I'll continue to talk about in Ghana, but that was just a few more. I think we're probably running our course of time for this installment. But yeah, life in Ghana was very, very wonderful. I think I'll pick up next time. I'll talk about, you know, how we ran our Sunday program. At one point, the temple was so large, and we came across an amazing experience. I'll wait till the next installment to talk about it. But yeah, Dandavat Pranam for listening, devotees. As I said, I always try to check with Pujapat Shanta Maharaj when I can get in touch with him. And like I said, maybe Ishwar at some point will chime in. And other devotees who came to Ghana will chime in. I think in the next installment I'll also talk Srinath Prabhu, I told you, my very dear friend. He ended up also coming to Ghana, and we had some adventures ourselves. So I'll get on all of that in the next installment. Jai Dandavat Pranam Vanchakala Puturvischa Kripasanavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.